This is the Brewer to Brewer podcast from All About Beer, a conversation that goes beyond the brew house and into topics that matter to brewing professionals and curious beer drinkers. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media to support journalism in the beer space. Check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. I'm Jeffrey Stuffings of Jester King Brewery, and this week I'm talking to my friend Khristopher Johnson of Green Bench Brewing in St. Pete, Florida. We'll get into this in just a minute. But first, this message.
First Tea is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. They've been working with brewers on a wide range of ingredients and delicious beers. First Tea combines the flexibility of order sizes with the experience you need to create innovative and successful tea beers. They get you the most direct from farm tea selection, so you are working with flavorful and consistent products. You can find more about First Tea's collaborations with brewers and tea ingredients by visiting blog.firsttea.com. That's blog.firsttea.com.
Well, Chris, great to see you and talk to you as always. For those listening, Chris is one of my very best friends in the brewing industry. We've known each other now for a number of years and have a lot in common, both professionally and personally. So it's always a joy to talk to one of, I think, the best people in beer. Chris, first off, before we get into it, how you doing? Good to see you. What's new?
Hey, pal. I'm doing good. It's really hot here, as I'm sure it is there in Texas. We're in Florida, so it's obviously like super hot, and it's our slow season, so we're dealing with that, which is tough, especially ironically coming off of last year. We were shocked that our summer is always our slowest season, but ironically, last year was surprisingly better than normal, and this year was like worse than normal. So it was just it's a transition. Seasons happen and businesses figure it out. But I'm doing well, and excited to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Eerily familiar because we experienced the same damn thing. We had a really strong 21 during the same time period. I think, we were largely out of COVID restrictions last summer, but still, I think because we had so much space and outdoor seating, like people were pretty much flocking to us, where we had a really strong 21, and like 22 started off pretty good. But right around like May, we had first off like an early summer. And then, we've had one of the slowest summers we've ever had. Like it's been kind of brutal, man. Yeah.
Dude, it's been the same, man. We was the same thing. Like obviously COVID restrictions, and then we popped out of them. And then last year we were like, usually we have we get slowed down really hard in June. Is like usually right when it starts. And so there's like June, July, August, September, October is like really when it starts to kind of come back. And then we have a huge winter time because everyone snowbirds and big tourist destination, and we have great weather, for 9 months out of the year, we have phenomenal weather. And so that's what usually happens. And then last year, June hit and we prepared for a shutdown. Never came. Like it was our record June in 2021. And then July was a little slower, but still better than normal. And even August was better than normal last year. And then we really didn't see a kind of hit until we got to like, for us, like the hurricane season, it's raining every evening. That's, it happens right now to like through September mostly. And so that was rough last year, but this year is like way worse. Like we hit June like first and it was like a wall, and it just like sales just stopped, like wholesale died. It just, even on-site sales were down pretty heavily. It's record, arguably one of the hardest summers that we've had, but we're almost through it, luckily. So, but it was hard to predict,
Yeah, our summer is other people's winter. I tell people that all the time. Like historically, we're slow from kind of like 4th of July to Labor Day is like our deadest period of the year. It started a little earlier this year because May was like 105 degrees out, which really sucked. And then, gas prices, inflation, economic fears, recession fears, like, our distro wholesale has been fine. Arguably that's been better than it ever has, but our on-site is like, we're trending like, I think right now we're like around 20% like off of last year's pace. And we've never
Yeah.
other than like COVID itself, we've not had a dips like that before. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
think year to date right now, we're not bad. I think we're like maybe 7% off of last year, but I think like summer, like if I take like June to now, we're like 13-14% off of last year's. So it was and wholesales actually has been, it's great to hear it's been good for you. Well, at least wholesale been steady.
yeah.
We had, I think July was like arguably one of the worst Julys in wholesale we've ever had, which is
Huh.
also kind of weird, but is what it is. Trends are not something that matter in 12 months is really what happens in the beer world, because it's constantly evolving and changing. So but yeah, we're, like I said, we're almost out of it, but it's been a weird few months.
Oh, for sure. We're looking forward to the fall. I mean, we start to see a little bit of like coming back to life this past weekend with like school back in session, and the temperatures finally, knock on wood, they've kind of finally broken where it's like high of like 90 instead of like literally high of 105. So
Yeah,
that's
for real.
that's been good. Well, hey man, I want to talk a little bit about Florida and the Florida beer scene, kind of like spanning out like macro, looking back in time. For listeners who may not know, I grew up, I went through kindergarten through high school just down the road from Greenbench in Bradenton, Florida to the south. And just even though I chose not to, live in Florida and move away and pursue a career in Texas, Florida is still very near and dear to my heart, which I think is, one of the reasons that Chris and I have become such good friends. So tell me about like getting into the beer scene when you were coming up as an amateur brewer and then making the transition to pro, and just like how that scene has evolved over the last, more than a decade.
Yeah. I mean, for one, I'm also a bit of a transplant as well. I wasn't born in Florida. I'm not from Florida. I was born in Tennessee in Memphis, and I moved here when I was like 10. But I've been here since, right? So I also went through like middle school and high school here, and then I went to college at University of South Florida. And yeah, it really started there. For me, it actually started kind of in middle school and right around that time, because in the 90s, my mid 90s, my father was a home brewer, and he just picked that up as like a hobby. And I remember JJ would, like, my dad, he would like he'd make stuff, like he started with extract, and he was doing like sort of partial mashes later on. And he got kicked out of the house from my stepmom because it was smelling weird, and I was too young to like really know or maybe even care at the time what he was doing, but I would like help him, take stuff out and whatever. So he would drink his home brews, and he had a pretty sophisticated setup from like looking back. We had a cooler in the garage, or a refrigerator in the garage with a tap drilled into it and corny kegs, and he would make his own labels, and we would go to like the Bucks games, like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like we had season tickets growing up, so I would go to games with him, and he was like the coolest dude at the party, like tailgate. Like he was the coolest guy, because he would show up, he'd be grilling brats, and he'd whip out bottles of his own home brews with like labels that were named after like players on the team. So it was like
Nice.
Brooks
Wow.
Brown Ale and like Allstott Amber and like Lynch's Pilsner and
Work done week.
Dilfer's Double. Yeah, worked well. Oh, Dunn was my favorite. He was actually my favorite player. And I had 28 jersey. That was my guy.
Oh yeah, he's just like a champion of a human being too. Like with all the work he's done
Yeah.
for poor people. Oh my God. Yeah.
Well, and that was his whole thing. Like he does, like he helps families that are single moms, and so he would like had this huge organization here where he would give a house to a family that was of a single mother and children, because he grew up that way. Well, and his mother actually was a law enforcement officer who died in the line of duty, and so he had helped raise his siblings, and yeah, he's the best. So he was like kind of my role model growing up. And my dad would set it up where like I couldn't go to games unless like I got good grades. Like that was the only reason I cared about school, was to go watch the Bucks play and watch work done. So my dad was like, he was into home brewing. By the time I was like old enough to understand what he was doing, he had kind of jumped hobbies a little bit, and kind of sold all his stuff. And later on, like I get to college, you fast forward, what that meant for me as a foundation was that I understood that there were other things involved, like there were, there were beers outside of the macro sort of understanding of beer, right? Like I knew there were things like brown ale, I knew there were things like Pilsner, I knew there were things like IPA, which he was really into IPAs. And so what we would do is or when I turned 21, him and I, the first beer I purchased, I went to the store and I bought like a 12 pack of Sierra Nevada Torpedo. And so like that was the foundation of like sort of my getting into beer. And then I started to, I switched majors in college, had a little more time on my hands, decided I wanted to change majors and then decided I want a hobby based upon that. And I knew I was like, my dad homebrewed when I was a kid. If he could do it, I could do it kind of thing. And he looked like he enjoyed it. Let me start homebrewing. So I picked up homebrewing in college. Me and my buddy Teddy, we went and bought homebrew equipment and we made beer in my apartment. And then I just caught the bug there basically. Right before I brewed, I spent I realized when I was I want to homebrew, I realized really quick I didn't know anything about beer. So I spent about a year before we bought that equipment just drinking beer and being let me figure out if I even like this before I invest the money and time into it. And so I pulled up just the free BJCP app, and I would get a mixed 6-pack of whatever style, and I'd go home and I'd drink it over the weekend and would just study it as I was drinking it. And so I think within a year, I kind of had a good foundation of what made what beers needed to smell like and taste like and how they were made and just a guideline. And so then once I started homebrewing, it all made a little bit more sense to me, I think, than a lot of people that jumped right in because of my father into me first drinking and then into me brewing beer. So I kind of made a little bit of a name for myself as a home brewer here locally. And then Cigar City around that time, it just opened. And so I had High Lie, which was, all the rage here for sure. And I went in one day and was introduced to their beers in a way that blew my mind. And then they hired me eventually. I went and volunteered there for a day. And I hung out with Wayne, the brewmaster, and Tim Ogden was brewing at the time too there. And I just kind of got to know the brew team, and then they gave me a job. I worked there for about a year. They fired me, and then I ended up at that point I was just I either literally once I got fired from Cigar City, it was literally kind of a weird fork in the road. Do I want to pursue this or something else? And the other thing in my life at the time was actually sports broadcast. Was doing radio for the Bulls. I was at USF. I was going there and I was doing football games and basketball games and volleyball, baseball, on the radio with a couple guys that worked at the radio station with me. And I was the programming director there. And I had to decide kind of at that point what I wanted to do. And I decided to sort of pursue beer based upon that and produce beer. And that's kind of how it started for me.
Well, I've no doubt you would have been just as successful in sports broadcasting as you have been in beer, given your personality and communication skills. So anyway, I want to say you chose wisely, but man, you do great in whatever you chose. So you mentioned Cigar City, which was also one of my brewing inspirations. My grandmother, who's now 98, still alive, lives in Sarasota, Florida. Whenever I go down and visit her, I was getting into beer around the same time. I think more or less kind of that 2006, 7, 8 is really when I made the jump from macro lager to craft beer. And I remember going to visit my grandmother around that time in Sarasota and discovering Cigar City and getting into the Humidor series. And then for me, just throwing out some of my inspirations, another gateway place in addition to Cigar City was like Dogfish and Brooklyn. I was in Boston for a period of time, so those were some of them and Harpoon were some of the East Coast beers that I would drink regularly, as well as Allagash. And then when I started getting into wild and spontaneous and farmhouse, beers from Rusty River, Jolly Pumpkin, ultimately Cantillon. So, those are kind of, some of the breweries that inspired us the most as, an American farmhouse brewery. But like, I mean, you mentioned Cigar City already, but like, what are some of like the breweries or beers that really like made you want to pursue this professionally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, I mean, to your point, yeah, looking at the landscape back then, especially in Florida, I mean, it was fairly bare. Like I know obviously you spent a lot of time, you said in like Boston and then in Chicago before that, or after that rather. But we didn't have like the import scene that those cities have and or regions. Like we're a pretty big import state, but it's like it's Corona. That's our import beer. And I would say like there were a couple beers that I had that kind of like changed my life. Like I would say, and I don't even mean like in the beer sense, like they changed how I thought about things outside of beer too. And really what I mean by that is that it put some perspective for me. It like built some guardrails of, okay, like you think you know something, but you don't, but you realize you know nothing. Like it was kind of like those kind of moments. And the first one actually, and at the time I was like I was into two really styles when I started homebrewing. It was IPAs and it was Saison. And it was for two different reasons. Like obviously one, IPAs, they were aggressive, but they were interesting and they brought something to the table in a way that kind of, they really punched me in the face a little bit and, like really shook you. Saison was perfect for me because I found later on as in like finding a vocabulary for it, I really liked beers that were dry. I liked beers that had bitterness and had character and had dryness and had bubbles. Like I love effervescence and so that style really resonated with me without me realizing at the time that that's what I was drawn to. And so and it also helped that I was in Florida. So like, you don't need temperature control kind of thing. Like that was also why Saison was a big deal for me. It's actually why I started making them. And then it just snowballed into, my passion for them. But the first beer that really kind of changed me was Stone Ruination, actually. It was like, it just come to Florida and I was at like Teddy, the guy I homebrewed with for the first time. He had graduated college at UT, University of Tampa, and we went to this place down the road. It was called The Grape. It was like a wine bar restaurant thing in Tampa. And we went there and this guy, the waiter was like, hey, you guys like craft beer? Like, sure, dude. Like, I guess. And he's like, we got this new beer and it's called Stone Ruination. So he brings a 12-ounce bottle out and we pop it and we pour it and it blew my mind. Like I shared it with Teddy because I couldn't drink the whole thing. It was so bitter and I didn't know what to do with it. Like I wasn't ready for like that beer. And that's how I felt. Like I'm not prepared for this thing. The next one was actually another Stone beer later on. And by this point, months had gone by and I felt like I had, learned a lot from that experience and learned since that experience. And I got a beer called Sublimely Self-Righteous. It was there like, it just said black ale on the bottle. And I was like, okay, whatever, let's get it. I love those guys, like whatever. So I pop it up and I pour it and I'm completely black beer, dense, sort of like off-white, almost like ivory foam, like damn near tan, but not quite. And I'm like, okay, it's going to be, roasty and chocolatey and all these, black malt characteristics. And I go to smell it and it smells like a pine forest and citrus. And I'm like taken aback, right? I know nothing again. Like it forced me back to just like not understanding what the fuck was going on. And so, yeah, that just blew my mind. And then the third beer that really did it for me was when I went to Cigar City that day and I was sitting at the bar and some guy was next to me. He literally spun around towards me and he's like, hey, you ever had Hunapoo? And I'm like, dude, I don't want your drugs. Like, I don't know what you're trying to sell me. Like, I don't. And so he describes me this beer. He's like, it's this imperial stout with chocolate, vanilla, cinnamon, ancho pasilla chili peppers. And I'm like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. So he orders me a beer. He's like, you have to try it. And it did just absolutely shake me. Like it just was an unbelievable experience that I just didn't understand. And that was the day I met everyone there. And I would say like, so for me, those beers were like foundationally prepared me to not expect anything. Like, that's how I felt about beer at that point. Like I got through those three and I was like, okay, anything someone pours you, no expectations, jump on it. Right. Like it could, It could taste like something you've had before. It could taste something you recognize. It could taste something you don't even know. And I think those were kind of the first ones that really got me into it. Obviously, like with Saison, we had Bob Sylvester here, so I would drink like Athene was something that I could get around town that I would drink a good amount of. I would drink, we can get Saison Dupont was around, so I could get that. But again, Florida wasn't a massive import market. So there were a lot of beers that later on became the foundations of some of like Saison and farmhouse ale beers that like I couldn't get at the time, that I had to kind of make them in order to try some of those things. I will say one of the beers that did that like, I think by that moment I had a pretty good grasp on where I wanted to go with sort of farmhouse ale and Saison. And this is the beer that was brought to me. There were two beers that were brought to me from someone else, that like literally I was working at a homebrew shop in Tampa, Southern Brewing and Winemaking, and we opened a brewery there. And it was where I worked before we opened Green Bench. And Regular is a home brewer, brought some beers in, and we could get one of them at the time, but I hadn't like visited it yet. And one of them was Bam Beer, which is like absolutely with Jolly Pumpkins. Bam Beer just blew my mind. Like that beer was incredible. And the other one was this beer. He's like, dude, I went to this brewery. They have the coolest like property ever. They're in Texas in the hill country. It's this place called Jester King. And he literally had this 750 of Noble King. And I was like, fuck yeah, let's go. He pops it open. And yeah, I mean, that beer was, I was like, okay, this is like, I do feel like I'm on the right track in understanding the style and understanding, I guess, what I like from this style. And that was a formative beer for me. That was one of the beers that I was like, I've been making Saison for a couple of years now, and this is kind of, I think I'm on the right track here, like this direction of that. And that beer was the one that kind of confirmed that for me.
Right on. I appreciate that, Chris. And to return the compliment, your Grisette remains one of the best examples of the style I've ever had, and just one of the most like drinkable and enjoyable farmhouse ales that I've ever had in any country. Yeah, props to Bob as well. I mean, around the time I was getting into Jolly Pumpkin, I was also getting into the Saint Somewhere. You also reminded me that Black IPA was a thing for a period of time there. I totally forgot about that moment in time. But and then Ruination, yeah, that was another beer that I was really, really stoked on in my early days of brewing, and was kind of disappointed when, not that I had like had it in years, but it's one of those things where like, I hadn't drank it forever, but then I saw they discontinued it. I was like, oh,
I know, I felt the same way. I was that's what's so funny. It's like part of me is like, I'm upset, but I was like, but I didn't help. Like I haven't been drinking it and sat however long. Yeah.
Well, let's shift gears slightly. One thing that, if someone just like off the street asked me like, hey, what's Jester King's legacy? I mean, I would be tempted to say very much, an answer along the lines of beer and our contribution to the beering scene, especially American farmhouse brewing. But I also feel that like we're in a city like a lot of modern American cities where it's absolutely essential that there be like original cultural fabric for the city. I mean, there's so much just homogeneity in the broader economic, especially food and beverage and beer world. And I feel like it's a tide we constantly have to push back against. And so, if someone said, the legacy of Jester King is you created like some authentic cultural fabric in your hometown, I would say that's amazing. Sign me up. That's great. When I go and visit Green Bench, I always get the feeling that, there's a unique culture, that it is a true landmark in the city of St. Petersburg. And then also following you as well as, Green Bench, I feel like that's something that you all are like consciously like think about, do stuff to promote, that it's not just like an afterthought, that like being like a cultural landmark is something that's part and parcel of your brewery. So yeah, tell me if I'm on base there or not.
Yeah, we actually don't care about the community at all. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. No, it is actually really important to us, man. We, I think, I mean, some of the foundations of the brewery itself were built like hanging out around a fire, home brewing, eating food. and talking about this vision, talking about what we wanted this to be like, talking about the kind of place we wanted to provide. And I think at the very core of all of that was St. Petersburg. At the very core of that was our city and our town. And we all have moved away. We'd all lived other places. We'd experienced amazing things, whether that be living somewhere or traveling somewhere. And I think what we always came back to, and this is still, I think, what an inspiration for me, at least, especially on our product and experience side, has been, why not St. Pete? Like, why can't St. Pete have these things? I think the most important part of being able to build something is understanding where you start, where you begin. And I think we always never wanted to lose sight of that. We always wanted to say, well, no matter what we want to add to St. Petersburg, let's make sure that we understand what St. Petersburg has been through, what it means to be a St. Petian, what it means to live here, to have grown up here, to maybe even been born here, to be a third, fourth, fifth generation St. Petian. And that was always like a part of the discussion, like no matter what. And so, yeah, it's super vital to us. I think our city is unique in that we're a city that cares about the things around us in a way that some other places I've lived hasn't. And that's not something we wanted to lose. Matter of fact, what we wanted to do was we wanted to highlight that. We wanted to shine a spotlight on the fact that St. Pete uniquely in I've lived in the Tampa Bay area in a bunch of places. I've lived other places in Florida. I've lived outside of Florida. And I do think there's something that is like, it's just uniquely St. Pete to care about what's going on here, and to care about how we treat it. And so that's always been like a huge part of what we care about. Like we say like our sort of motto when we were building our business plan and part of our mission statement was, brew quality, build community. Like that was always like what we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure that, number one, whatever we brought to St. Petersburg was worthy of St. Petersburg, right? It had to be good enough for St. Petersburg, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the best there can possibly be. And so I strive to be the best that we can possibly be all the time. And I try to take that as a responsibility more so than, than just like an afterthought. Like it's truly something that I feel. I want to represent our city, and I hope that I've done that in a way that people here would be proud of. I hope that, anytime I leave this city or this state, this country, and I talk about us in a way that people here would be proud of, because I'm proud to live here. I'm proud of the people that are here, and I'm proud of how much people care, man. I don't know how to like really describe it, to be honest with you. Like it's such a vibe here, man. It's such a the people here truly care, and it fuels me. It builds an energy within me, and it builds this like just incredible energy that just makes me want to be better for the city. And I don't see that everywhere. I don't see that sometimes like 30 minutes away from me or 20 minutes away from me. There's something really unique about this area. And so, yeah, the truth is we wanted to build something that was economically going to help the city, wanted to build something that was culturally going to help the city, wanted to build something that was going to last in this city. And we wanted to be a focus point so that other people could be inspired to bring creativity and excellence to this city. And that's why we did it. That's why we opened the brewery. We opened here in 2013. We turned 9 this year. And when we opened on this street, everyone thought we were crazy because there was nothing over here. And now it's vibrant where we are. And we were the first, we changed the zoning laws in St. Petersburg for breweries to even exist. Not just for our brewery to exist. Like we consciously wanted there to be a ton of breweries to exist because we wanted that growth. We wanted people to be excited, and we wanted people to reinvest in the place that they lived, so that it could make a just a more enjoyable place for all of us. And now there's, damn near 20 breweries or so in St. Petersburg alone, which, there's only 300,000 people or so in our city technically. And so, I think we've built something pretty special. By no means are we obviously the only, part of that, but it feels pretty good to know that we've been a part of that. And the next thing is just building opportunity. I'd say that's the last part, is making sure that once we build this thing, we then use this position to continue to drive opportunity to people and places that feel like and have ever been told that didn't exist. And that's sort of the next step. That's what we've, I think, been doing for a few years now. Once we got to the point of being established and, got the business running, established our location, established our plan and our vision, the next step was phase 2 was making sure to sort of reinvest some of that knowledge, energy, and resources that we had built or that we could generate back into the people around us and the places around us. And there's hardly anything more rewarding than that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I can attest, having grown up down the road, once you cross over into St. Pete, it's special. It really is just a wonderful community. And you and Green Bench are, I'd say, a pretty integral part of that. All right, we're going to take a short break for this message and then come right back for more of this conversation with Khristopher Johnson of Green Bench Brewing.
First Tee is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. They've been working with brewers on a wide range of ingredients and delicious beers. First Tee combines the flexibility of order sizes with the experience you need to create innovative and successful tea beers. They get you the most direct from farm tea selection, so you are working with flavorful and consistent products. You can find more about First Tee's collaborations with brewers and tea ingredients by visiting blog.firsttee.com. That's blog.firsdtea.com.
All right, we're back with Chris Johnson from Green Bench. Chris, I want to get a little technical now. Probably some brewers and home brewers listening to this show. So let's talk. Let's start off with Farmhouse. You and I first bonded over Farmhouse beer. I'm pretty sure we met at one of the Crooked Stave What the Funk festivals, and I think you had some Grisette you were pouring, and that was the first beer I ever had from Green Bench. And like I said before, it was, to this day, still one of my favorite Farmhouse beers. And, you talked about your background with the style and, how it was one of your early motivations. So, from a technical perspective, like, what are you looking for in Farmhouse? Like, what makes a good Farmhouse beer to you?
That's such a good question. So, okay, to start, the first time we actually met was...
Did I get wrong?
No. You were pretty close. You're pretty close. It was at a What the Funk event, but I was not pouring.
Okay.
It was like one of the really early ones. We had just opened our brewery, and I went out there, and I think I met you inside. I met a guy in line who it was the Beer Diaries guy.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, who also used to be he was like the founder of BioWare, which is one of my favorite video game companies before that. And I met him in line. I just recognized him. I was like, dude, you made Knights of the Republic. That's one of my favorite games ever. And so we walked inside, and he knew you. And so I met you there. That's when we first met. But then you had my beers the next, I would say 7-8 months later. CBC was in town in Denver as well. And so they had another What the Funk, and that's, I think, when I had Chrysette. And so anyway, just an aside.
Yeah, quick shout out to Greg Zeschik was
Greg, yes.
Yeah,
man,
yeah, who now has a brewery in Edmonton, Canada. But anyway, please continue.
Which is where he's from. So he went back home and opened a brewery. Awesome. Also, again, one of my favorite video games ever. So Farmhouse Ale. I think there's a few elements that I like the most out of Farmhouse Ales. And I guess this might segue nicely into another conversation we might have, which is people ask me a lot of times, I'm sure you get the same, maybe you don't, maybe you don't get the same question. I get this question a lot, which is, what is your favorite beer style? Because I do make a lot of different styles of beer. And and now you do too. But I mean, for the longest time, you were kind of making, some narrowed, focused things. And I think so what I would say to people was always I really kind of have two styles of beer that I think are my favorites, right? At least right now, it's Pilsner and, farmhouse, sort of more specifically, maybe like table beer, Brett focused table beer, is kind of arguably my favorite. And the reason I picked those two is because I don't think there's as many differences as there are between those two things. There's more similarities. Generally speaking, they're typically pale beers. They're typically very dry. They're typically kind of bitter. They're typically very effervescent. They typically check the boxes for me that are drinkability. And fermentation is extremely important in both of them. That without that part, they don't exist in sort of the way that we enjoy them. Obviously, on one side, the fermentation for sort of Saison farmhouse beers are going to be, fermentation forward, where the characteristics that we get from that beer are generated and or enhanced from the fermentation, right? You can have hoppy farmhouse ales, you can have malty farmhouse ales, but none of those two don't exist without fermentation forward character in each one of those. And I love that nuance. I love that character that fermentation can bring to these other elements that the beer can have, right? On the other side with Pilsner, what I love about Pilsner is ultimately you almost want a beer that's devoid of fermentation. You want a beer that is, when you drink it, the fermentation is so clean and so technically precise that you're getting malt and you're getting hops, and that's kind of it. Otherwise, just carbonation, which is in both of them generally fairly high. If we're talking German Pils, obviously there's exceptions to this rule on either side, but I generally like that character. And I think that was what drew me initially to farmhouse ale. I love the open-endedness of farmhouse ale. With that said, I'm a traditionalist. I like traditional beers a lot. I don't like to be boxed into just making traditional beers, but I'll tell you what, when you can nail a traditional beer repetitively, that makes you skilled enough, I think, to make arguably the best of the sort of outside the box beers. And that's not across the board, but it's like a chef in some ways, right? When you master the basics, it's a lot easier, not easier, you're more prepared rather to utilize those tools to create almost any flavor or character that you want in your dish. And I feel that way about farmhouse ale. I feel like when I can make a great Pilsner, it makes me a better farmhouse brewer. You know what I mean? Something that otherwise is strictly opposite. There's so many similarities that I find between those styles. Yeah, man, I love the drinkability of them. I guess that's ultimately what I love about them. I love the root of raw grain. I love the root of just it's very ingredient based. All the ingredient based. That's my favorite part about it.
Yeah, our original head brewer Garrett Crowell. I remember him saying that Saison is really just like farmhouse Pilsner at its core. So I totally concur. I should know this, but have you experimented both with pure culture farmhouse as well as obviously mixed firm? I've had dozens of mixed firm beers from Green Bench, but I'm curious if you've ever done pure culture farmhouse styles as well.
It's a great question. Actually, as Green Bench, no. I experimented with it at other breweries that I worked at, and home brewing before that years ago. But here at Green Bench, when we opened, I wanted farmhouse ale as a whole, not Saison, but farmhouse ale as a whole to be such an important part of who we were for a couple reasons. One of them is there wasn't a lot to have around here, right? Like I said, we had Bob, which is awesome. And he was for sure a major inspiration on me. And still is today. Like I still talk to him regularly, and he still drinks my beers and gives me feedback, and it's awesome. Like, so that's a huge part of it. I would say that like, I couldn't, like, part of the reason we do a lot of the things here at Green Bench is because I can't readily get a lot of the things that I want here, right? Like that's like a big part of it. Like we built Web City Cellar because we couldn't get Web City Cellar anywhere else. Like that was a part of the deal, right? Like we make mixed culture beer because I couldn't get a lot of mixed culture beer here at the time. When we opened our doors in 2013, we started with a foeder. We were the first brewery in the southeast of the country that had one. And I was reaching out to, Chad and Chad Jacobson from Cricket Stave, and I was reaching out to Gabe Fletcher, and I was reaching out to Ron Jeffries, and I was just like asking anyone I could, like, what is it like to use one, and like, what's the process? How do you clean it? How do you ferment it? And I got a different response from every single person that had one, which is great because it meant that there isn't a universal thing. We're still all figuring this out, and so we created our own process based upon that here at Green Bench. And I wanted to do something unique. What I wasn't prepared for, rather, let me back up. What I wasn't confident in, maybe that's the right word. I wasn't confident in my abilities to create my favorite element of farmhouse ale, which is a house culture, some kind of house flavor, some kind of uniqueness to the style that I wanted to bring to the table, that I wanted to say, I obviously I wanted the quality in the beer to be able to stand up to what I thought were the best, but I wanted it to taste different than the best. Like I didn't want it to taste synonymous, and I didn't want it to taste ubiquitous. Like I wanted it to be unique. And that's my favorite element of farmhouse ale, is that it can be Pilsner, but it's a unique Pilsner. It's like a unique version. It's a fingerprint of it. And so I got a foeder because frankly, I wasn't confident in my ability to like repitch a culture that I was building for ever, like to harvest and pitch. And I didn't think I could do it. And so the idea was to have a foeder that I could pitch these wild yeasts in and add over time and develop, and then create a house culture. Now, most of our farmhouse ales are really, almost all of them, not most of them, but well, definitely most of them, not all of them though, are like yeast based. They don't really have bacteria. We'll blend that in whenever we want to do some like mixed culture stuff. And every once in a while we'll use mixed culture to like create, sort of, I guess, American or mixed culture farmhouse ales, like more sour focused, acidity focused beers. Most of our farmhouse ales, saisons, table beers, Grisette, for example, are all yeast forward beers. So our foeder has, when we pitched it, at least 4 yeast strains. It was 2 Brett strains, 2 Sac Diastatica strains, and we ferment in the foeder, and then we bottle condition. And eventually, pretty quick, once we sort of blended these together, we had a character that tasted different, like similar in a lot of ways, but not exactly the same as anyone else's on the table. And that's what I was going for. I was trying to create a fingerprint. I was trying to create a stamp to say, like, this is our version of this thing that we love. And Grisette, to your point, is actually, Grisette's 100% Brettanomyces fermented beer. It's Brett C and Brett Jury from BSI that we ferment. Actually, that one's fermented in stainless. It's a stainless fermentation with Brettanomyces, and then bottle conditioned. And that's like about a 3 to 4 month beer. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks in stainless, and then the rest in bottle conditioning. And then that's that beer.
Yeah, pure chef's kiss on that one, man. It's so flipping good. Just one more riff on like Pilsner as farmhouse, or like the similarities. We make this beer. It's with Live Oak Brewing in Austin, called Collaborations Beer, where they give us their Pils wort. We ferment it in stainless steel with our mixed culture, and give it like months, and it'll get like almost like super wild and funky. But like for the first like 1 to 2 months, it's just so beautiful. It's just like crisp pilsner with just that little bit of like interesting yeast complexity, which, I'm thinking of like, that reminds me of like Yvonne DeBate's passage in, Farmhouse Ales by Phil Markowski. They're talking about how like it's crisp, it's dry, it's drinkable, it's bitter with just a little bit of interesting yeast character. And like, it's just, I mean, you can tell, obviously, I mean, it wasn't like a dummy question, like, but clearly we have very, very similar philosophies on Farmhouse, which is super cool.
We just like tasty things, Jeff, you and I.
Yes, we do, sir. And by the way, shout out to Web City Cellars. I got to visit, COVID kind of, kept me away for a few years, but then I got to come to Green Bench last March of this year for Food for Thought. And I really got to experience Web City Cellars for the first time. And it is the most remarkably wonderful curated experience with beer and wine. I was just in heaven. I could have spent like a week there, just really doing a deep dive on the whole portfolio there. It was, yeah. Do yourself a favor and go to Web City Cellars, and have a Postcard Pils afterwards.
Thanks,
right.
buddy. I appreciate that.
You got it, man. One thing I've been really impressed by of you, yes, your company, but you personally, is like all the social advocacy, community impact work that you've done. I oftentimes like marvel of like, where does Chris find the time to do all these awesome things outside of just running a business and being a partner and a dad. I mean, for instance, for those listening at home, Chris is a professor of brewing arts at University of South Florida as part of their diversity in brewing scholarship program. He's also been very active in beer culture and culture for the kids. So just tell me a little bit about like that work and, what you're doing and, how it's impactful.
Yeah, man, thanks for the opportunity to talk about that. That's, I joke with Krista, my partner. I'll tell her all the time. I'm like, like last night, for example, we had a meeting last night for the MJF, the Michael James Jackson Foundation for Brewing and Distilling, that Garrett Oliver started, that I'm on the board of, and we finalized our selections of candidates that will be awarded scholarships to brewing school and distilling school. And, I've said several times to a lot of people, it is the most fun thing. It is the most rewarding thing. It is something that gives me chills, that makes me feel so good, like all the time, more so than most things that I do on my daily basis, right? Which is business stuff and beer stuff, which is, I'm not complaining, but it is a job. It's like it's work. It's the work that I love. But man, when you give someone an opportunity to do something that they literally will say to you, and I've had people tell me this, I didn't think I had an opportunity to do this, or even I was even considered for it. There just is no feeling like it. Like it's a lot of work. It is a lot of time, and it is a lot of energy, and it's a lot of time out of my day and family and work, but it's worth it completely. So thank you for letting me talk about it, because it's a lot of work, but it's fun. I'm one of the founding faculty members of the USF Brewing Arts program. We started that about 6 years ago. So we teach brewing arts at the university, which has been awesome. We then send the students at the end of the course, which the course is online for the most part. So anyone, anywhere can kind of take it. And it requires on-site training in a brewery. So you get to check off competencies, making sure you understand how to clean kegs and mash in and can or bottle or whatever, whatever that brewery can do. The beauty is we built a good amount of, I have a good network of people that I know now, that if you're out of state or country or whatever, I can typically find a brewery that's willing to have you in as an intern, that you can then, work on those competencies and get those checked off. We have had over 90% of the students that have gone through the course have either moved on to work in the industry or open their own breweries.
Wow.
And which is, it's so incredible. What's really cool about it is not everybody wants to open a brewery that joins it. There are some people that are just like, I'm a home brewer and I want to learn more. So like part of that, 10% is just people that's not their dream anyway. So really of the people that are interested, the percentage is even higher than that. So yeah, I've been doing that for 6 years now. It's awesome. It's a great program. I teach with some really, 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 really fascinating and interesting and smart people that help us. And the person that runs it, Jennifer Cedillo, she is world class. She's a biologist. She's incredible. She actually was one of my first hires here in production staff. She started our lab for me because I really needed it. And her and her husband were home brewers years ago. They were in my home brew club. So she knows beer really well. And she's now my boss. She's like runs the program. She's the best. In addition to that, Beer Culture is a nonprofit that I'm the vice president of. Our focus is to diversify the beverage space, the craft beverage space as a whole. So not just beer, but cider, mead, NA, wine, kind of any spirits, anything in the beverage space, craft wise. Not even just craft wise, we're down with anything. We're just trying to diversify this industry, whether that be a person of color, whether that be women, whether that be, whatever. We want to make sure it gets as diverse as possible. The Beer Culture mission is to focus more specifically on people of color. I'm a person of color. The founder is Dooch and his wife, Letitia. They started this whole thing. Dom is the man. He wrote a book called This Ain't the Beer You Used To, and you can find it on Amazon. It's great. And I met him years ago. They moved from the Bronx to Florida. He was working at a local business called Brew Bus to start with. He was driving the brew bus around, and he would stop here at the brewery. I remember like hanging out and chatting with them for like 20 minutes, like while they went in to drink. Him and I would just talk. And we started to gravitate towards each other because there weren't too many Black people that were just around, right? And so we would just see each other and we would talk. And we got closer, and we talk on the phone sometimes about our frustrations, with being Black people in the industry and how difficult that can be sometimes without people realizing it. And he posed some really tough questions to me, that made me really think and made me realize, like I have privilege, and I understand that there are people that have less than me, and that was kind of the foundation of a lot of the work that I started working with him on, which was, we've got Webs open, which was a hassle, thanks for the shout out. But once Webs open, which is 3 years ago now, it's hard to believe, although 1 year closed during the shutdown.
Right.
Once it got opened, I called him and I told him to come over. He was here all the time anyway, so he came by to have a beer with me. And I said, I want to start a charity tap. And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, I want a beer on tap at all times that when you pull from it, you pour a beer, we throw money to a charity. And I want that charity to be local. I mean, like hyper local, not just like, not Florida, not Tampa Bay, like St. Pete, like in the city of St. Petersburg. And him and his wife, Letitia, had been doing charity work since they were like teenagers in the Bronx. Like, they're very involved. And so I asked for his help. So we decided to do a collaboration. It's called Culture Chronicles. And so we ended up doing like these series of Culture Chronicles beers and he found the local nonprofit called Building Beds that builds beds for kids that don't have them. There's over 7,000 kids in Pinellas County that estimated that don't have beds to sleep on. So we would brew a beer, take money from it, donate it, build beds for kids. Like it was incredible. And so eventually Dom wanted to step down from Beer Culture. It was getting a lot for him personally. And, it was just difficult for him to continue with some of the resistance that he was getting in the industry, because Dom had built a name for himself, and he was, Dooch was becoming a pretty important figure in the context of the social scape of craft beer specifically. And with that comes a lot of backlash and comes a lot of hurdles to sort of jump over that people were just placing in front of him, which is really, really difficult to deal with. And so he took a back seat a little bit, and I was pretty fortunate, like, because they called me one day, like a Sunday or something, and I'm on FaceTime with him, and it's him and Tisha and his wife, who's amazing. And they were like, Tisha's going to take over. And Tisha, like, had all these plans. Like, was like, we're to a nonprofit. We're going to, like, she black woman the shit out of it. Like, overnight, it just was like, there was a website and it was organized and there was like all these plans and mission statement and all this, like, she just handled everything. And I was just like blown away with her organization and how fast it all happened and her execution. So I reached out to her. I was like, one of the positions was like a craft, like, specialist or expert or something on the board. And I said, I know a lot of people. So, like, if you need help, let me know. I would love to help you connect and build funds for beer culture. And she said, actually, I want you to be the vice president. I was like, so I thought about it for a couple of days, and then I said yes. And it's been incredible. We built the rest of the board. We interviewed everybody. We put everyone together. Our team is incredible. And we're constantly, like, helping people get into the industry that literally have told us we didn't think we could be a part of this, whether it be brewing schools, whether it be Cicerone certification, whether it be internships in writing about beer. Like, we have an internship just about that. We have an internship about, like, I mean, it's incredible, man. We've got, like, grants where we give $5,000 even outside of the beverage space to men, to people, to black men who are interested in opening a business. We're working on one right now for women in the beer industry. That's going to be a grant that's going to be incredible. Working with Brave Noise. And I mean, we're doing such great work. And it's just a testament to the team's passion and energy. And then her and I were asked to join the board at MJF as well, where, we're that is a bit more of a narrow focus, where it's funding scholarships to brewing and distilling schools for people of color, because, there are less people on the deck that are of a diverse background than we need in this industry. And so I guess you couple all those things together, and it's been great, man. It's been so cool to be a part of. It's been so cool to contribute in a way that, like, gives people opportunities. And honestly, the response from the majority of breweries around the country have been amazing. They've been great at being like, yeah, I'll take on interns. Yeah, I'll take on this person that, like, is in brewing school, and then they're hiring them, and we're getting people jobs. The Bronx Brewery, a big shout out to them. They work with us on an internship program, a paid internship program, where a person of color through beer culture goes there, and they get paid for like 2 months, and they work there. And most of them have gotten jobs in the beer industry. 2 of them at the Bronx Brewery got hired. I got a guy, Isan, who got a scholarship through beer culture, and then he also took my course at USF and was an intern here. I hired him as well. I'm gonna go and throw this weird news out there, but well, it's early news, but there's a person I'm really proud of. Her name is Joanne. She started working here, and she was a recipient of the Cicerone scholarship and of their testing program. And today she texted me and Tisha, and she got a 97 on her first try, 97% on her written exam for a Cicerone. And it's just stuff that I just can't be more proud of, man. It's just like, that's the coolest part. That's like the coolest part.
Well, hats off to you, Chris. I mean, I see a lot of what you've spoken to from afar, and it's super inspirational. It inspires us to try to do good work here in Texas. So hats off. One thing you mentioned, time out from family. I want to kind of, I think, we came up, a lot of us, at least we're kind of like this, second wave. I don't know if it's a second wave or what, but there's like the 90s era boom. And then, we're kind of maybe like the next wave that kind of like, came up around that like 09 to, 2013, when just like we went from like 1,700 breweries in the country to like over 6,000 and climbing. So like we're like 9,000 today. So like, the kind of that next wave. And, I feel like, not to overgeneralize, but a lot of us were fairly young and, and now it's like, a decade and a half almost later. And, not everyone obviously, but a fair amount of us now have families and children, and I think have more to balance than perhaps four. And maybe I'm like overgeneralizing based on my own experience, but that certainly is a lot of what I've managed. And in the last episode with Marcus Baskerville from Weathered Souls, I spoke to my own personal experience quite a bit. So I want to ask you. I mean, you're not only a partner to Kristen, and then also Braden, your son. So tell me about that experience being a brewery owner and a committed dad.
Yeah, it's I mean, on one hand, it's super fun. I mean, it's really cool for him to see someone, that he can look up to, that's passionate about what they do, that loves what they do, that doesn't feel like they're doing something that's monotonous. I consider that a major benefit, hopefully, to him and his future, and letting him see something where he feels like he can be whatever he wants to be. And I do try to do my best to instill that, to let him know you can do whatever you want. Like you can, you dream it, you achieve it kind of thing. Obviously, there's a lot to this job and any job that maybe he doesn't understand yet, which is fine. He'll figure it out as he grows up. He's a smart kid. By the way, he's 14 and in high school now. I know. I just wanted to throw that out on you. Just drop that on you, make you feel weird. It's so weird. It's so weird. He's so good, man. He's just a smart kid. He's super passionate. He's super motivated. He doesn't take too much for granted for a 14-year-old, which is pretty fun. I think I lucked out with just like a kid that like has a cool perspective, but it is a tough balance, to your point. Like it is and it has been, Braden means the world to me. He is, he's Kristen's son. I met him when he was 5. That's when I met them, and I've been with them since. And he has taught me a lot. He's grown with me. But man, there's some. The balance has been tough, and it's been tough for me to learn. And I've grown up in it. To your point, like we're fairly young. I might be on the younger side of that a little bit because I'm 35 now, and when I met him, I was in my late 20s. And I do look back on that and think sometimes like, man, what I would have done, and how I would have behaved and what I didn't know. But there are some nights, I'll talk to Kristen about this sometimes where, she'll tell me straight up, like there were some nights when I was out doing something, someone showed up from a brewery and I needed to talk to them or whatever and spend time with them. And Braden would come to her and say, "When's Chris coming home?" "Well, I don't know, honey." And he would get sad. And that's not worth it. It's not worth it. Like what I have built and what we've done is awesome. But there are some things, like obviously part of that growth as being a father and making sure that you're there at home, man, it's really hard to balance with like a small business growth and that at the same time, because they're both growing, right? Like one is not, one is not to sacrifice the other. And that's kind of something that I feel like I've tried to learn over the years is there are sacrifices that need to be made on both sides for sure. But I don't think at the expense ever really one or the other. And so like, communication's key, making sure that we talk about when these things happen, what the expectations are, being honest with each other about those expectations. and I don't just mean like between me and Kristen, I also mean between me and Braden, and understanding what we all are expecting and what we need in order for this to work, but also understanding that we all got stuff to do, right? And so yeah, it's been a long time coming, and it's still growing, and it's a tough balance, man. I mean, I think Braden being 14, we have a lot more in common now than we used to. Not always. I mean, I guess the commonalities have just shifted a lot more. For example, he's into playing basketball now. Like, he's constantly outside dribbling the ball. He's practicing his footwork. Like, he's not like mad when I throw cones down and I'm like, all right, I'll try this. He used to get weird about that, and now he's down. He's always like, Chris, we need to hit the court this weekend. I'm like, yes, sir, let's go. And so, we'll go and play. And those are the best days. Like, those are my absolute favorite days. And those are, it's the coolest part, of sort of the job is spending time with them. And, it's just cool to see them grow, man. It's been a tough balance. It's been a tough balance, and it still is, traveling and going to festivals and going to conferences and being gone sometimes during the season, for 2-3 weeks out of the month, and coming back, and it's like, how'd you get taller? Like, like, what happened? Like, and in some ways, like, obviously it's what you have to do, when you commit to something like this, and there's responsibilities that are the people that are here and the people that believe in it and want to make sure that you invest back into that, over time. But being able to communicate with your children and with your, significant others, and being able to come up with an understanding between you all on what the true expectations are here, and there's compromises. You got to make compromises and sacrifices both ways. There's some events and stuff that, I mean, personally, I'm at a point now, and luckily he's 14, like I said, like, we can take him on a lot of these trips now. Like, a lot of what I'm doing is just being like, it's a family trip, like, we went to the Firestone Walker Invitational, and it was like, we're all three going. And we went an extra like 5 days beforehand just to spend time with each other and explore the city and have him eating In-N-Out burger for the first time, like, it was just shit like that, and it's great. But then, of course, I got to bounce away for a couple of days because I'm running a collab with Firestone Walker, and that's rad. Like, I'm not gonna miss that. Like, that's cool as shit. So, like, I'm gonna do it. And they were cool with that. Like, all right, cool. Y'all hit the beach. I'm gonna go do this. And then, then went to the festival. And so there's work involved, but I do my best to try to bring the team, if you will. And Kristen's always been good with it. Like, in the past, like, when he was younger, and like, I would sometimes try to plan it so that maybe he would, when he was with his father, her and I would go on a trip together, and I would bring her to festivals and stuff. And now that he's older, I can bring him to kind of some of these things. And some of them, he gets a kick out of it. Like, he went to a festival with me in Memphis, which is where I'm from originally, and we were at Wiseacre pouring beer. And he's like, can I pour? And I'm like, well, no, you're too young. And he's like, can I open the bottle? I was like, sure. So I just like let him, I gave him a bottle opener, and he was just cracking bottles and putting them back in the bin. And now he was just hanging out with me, and it was kind of cool to just have him there. So I do my best to balance it. It's tough. It's tough on all of us, but I think we're all in a place where we understand each other a lot more. So it's good. I know you, man, like, George is like playing ball now and just active. And I know, like, you took a bit of a bigger backseat, if you will. Like, you went to the third row on backseat on like going to stuff because you were the face and brand and everything, and you were everywhere. And now you're really picky about some of those things, which, I love, man. I love getting videos from you that you'll text me about, like, check out this base hit, or like, like, it's dope.
Oh no, man. I'm more sports dad these days than brewer face of brewery. Final question. You mentioned basketball, and for those listening, Chris and I probably text more about NBA basketball than any other topic. I was a basketball player growing up. Still love basketball. Play at least a couple times a week. At least shoot around a couple times a week. And I've always been more of an NBA guy than the college game. And I think the same is true for Chris. So the question is, for the new season, the 2022-2023 NBA season, give me your conference champs and your finals champs, and then I'll give you mine.
Oh man, tough question. Yeah, for anybody that knows, or that doesn't know, Jeff and I speak, like, we probably text nearly weekly. And I would say it's almost always basketball. For this one, real quick, I'm going to pop open this 6th grain Saison from Jester King.
Awesome.
It's going to be my last beer. And damn, it's good. It's really, really good.
Nice, dude.
I was going to share it, but I might not. Okay, so I'm a Braun guy. Like, I'm a pretty big Braun guy.
By the way, we're not having the GOAT conversation. That's not what I was saying. Totally torpedo this podcast and make it like
not what I was saying. It's not what I was saying. I'm not into all the tertiary statistics that Jeff is in to kind of like, prove something that's wrong. But here's the deal. I would say, all right, Eastern Conference. This is a great question. I'm going to say, we got Katie back, we got Kyrie back, we got Steve Nash back, we got the whole Brooklyn crew back. I'm going to say that they do well enough to make it. I'm actually going to say, with Ben Simmons in the lineup, I'm going to say he actually plays this year. And I'm going to say they actually beat the Sixers in order to make it to the Western Conference Finals, where the Milwaukee Bucks will destroy them. And I think the Bucks are going to go to the finals and the Eastern Conference Finals. You go with that?
So just to clarify, we've got Bucks winning the championship over, coming out of the West. You said who?
No.
Oh, wait.
What I'm saying is the Bucks are going to win the East, beating the Brooklyn Nets. But I wanted to give a caveat that I think the Nets will beat the Sixers in the round before that.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
Which will be fun because you got Harden and Joel Embiid in the Sixers, but you have Ben Simmons, you have Kyrie, and you have KD with Brooklyn. I think they get further than they have in the past, and they lose in the Eastern Conference Finals to the Milwaukee Bucks, who I think have to go through the Celtics to get there.
Okay, well, I'll chime in and just make it short here. I'll say I got the Bucks too coming out of the East. I think if Chris Middleton had not gone down, they would have made the finals.
I completely agree.
So
Western Conference.
I got the Bucks too. Yeah, Western Conference. You're
Western Conference. I'm going to say, this is a tough one. I'm going to say, coming back from a full season, Kawhi Leonard and the Clippers.
Get the fuck out. Go ahead.
Kawhi Leonard and the Clippers win the Western Conference Finals, and I think they beat the Milwaukee Bucks, and Kawhi gets his 3rd ring and 3rd Finals MVP. Which, by the way, I'm a Braun guy. I'm not I love Kawhi. I do like him in a vacuum. I'm not a fan of the Clippers. I'm not a whatever. But I do think the last time he took a year off, he went to Toronto and won a finals. And so he took a year off. He's healthy. Him and PG. I think they put it together this year. I think they win the Western Conference Finals. And I think they actually win a championship, bring the championship back to LA. Not to my guy Braun, but whatever.
Well, you totally stole my thunder because that was going to be my
You were going to say Clippers over Bucks?
I was going to say, hey, I got LA, and I thought you were going to think, he's got my boy Braun. But then I was going to do a fast one and be like, no, the Clippers. No, I think that's a strong pick. I mean, Kawhi, when healthy, is just the Terminator, and Paul George is a freak show as well. Okay, I'm going to change mine on the fly because he went LA Clips. I feel like at this point I have to go with my non-sexy pick, which is just chalk.
LeBron James and the Lakers.
No, they're
I'm sorry.
They should be better. I agree. And LeBron, I mean, he is playing sensationally, especially for his age. And again, we're not having the GOAT conversation, but I have seen statistics within the last several months.
Aren't we?
Of his, no, I guess on some level we're always having it, but I mean, I have seen like what he has done, like from age, let's just say like 35 on relative to the other greats from
It's
previous
unbelievable.
decades. And I'll give you that. It's truly remarkable how
Staggering.
he's
Yeah.
not falling off. So I'm gonna go chalk then and say that the Dubs are just gonna, it's gonna be Splash
Repeat.
Brothers. Yeah, they're
We're
gonna
gonna repeat.
run it back for number 5. So
I got a feeling that we're gonna see Memphis go pretty deep, hopefully.
I hope
Depends
so.
on how long Jaren Jackson's like hurt, because I know he's hurt for a good amount of the season. But I truly, and I think I texted you this. I'm not sure who I talked to, but I was like, it was during the Memphis Warriors series this last year, and I was like, whoever wins this series is winning the finals. And then the Dubs ended up winning, and then they won the finals. And it was just because I thought that was the challenge. As far as I was concerned, that was like the most challenging series that I saw in the playoffs for anybody. And I could see Braun and the Lakers knocking maybe someone off. I could see the Suns still winning a ton of regular season games, or Denver. And then
Sure.
maybe if AD's healthy and fair, they might win a first, maybe even a second round. I don't really believe in the Mavericks anymore. They've lost too much.
Yeah.
Obviously, Luka's a beast, but they've
Right.
lost too much to go deep.
Agreed.
So he might knock them off. He might knock off like the Suns or Denver, but I don't think he's going to get past like the Clippers and look out for Portland. I mean, Dame's back. So
Yeah. And speaking of
It'll be fun.
Denver, I saw clips of Jamal Murray playing some scrimmage games in the
Oh.
offseason. I mean, if he can do that, it's going to be fun to have
So
him
good.
back.
So good.
Well, so we're on record for the season. We'll see how it goes. I have become a big Ja Morant fan, even though I've never, historically been a Grizzlies fan. I have latched on to Ja Morant just because he's just so next level. So I want to see him continue to dominate, and it'll be fun if the Grizzlies made a run and maybe rematch with the Dubs in the conference finals.
Go Grizz.
All right. Chris will be back on the next episode of the show as the host, having a conversation with a brewer of his choosing. They'll air in 2 weeks' time, so make sure you tune in for that. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media to support journalism in the beer space, and check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. I'm Jeffrey Stuffings of Jester King Brewery. Thank you for listening to the Brewer to Brewer podcast.
This episode was brought to you by First Tea. First Tea delivers the ingredients and experience brewers need for delicious beers and innovative flavors. Flexible order sizes and direct from farm teas for your next brew. Find out more about First Tea by visiting blog.firsttea.com. That's blog.firsdtea.com.